now you should be able to hear and see me again. And in a second, you should see the screen again. So everything back to normal? Wonderful. Apologies. So that was the glitch for today. My apologies for the mistake. Yes, welcome back. Thank you. So next type of Kanban is two-bin Kanban, and sometimes also called a two-bin system. It's still very, very similar to a Kanban system, except you have only two Kanbans or two boxes per part type. And it's basically the same as a Kanban, but it's common if you have a low demand, or at least the demand is slower than replenishment time. So one bin lasts long enough while you reproduce or redeliver the next bin. So also a popular Kanban system for items which have a low demand. And some people even use a three-bin Kanban, one bin at the supplier, one bin at the inbound warehouse, one bin at the supermarket. That's also one option, but it still works pretty much like a Kanban. Every part has a Kanban, or every box of parts has a Kanban. And in this case, very often the Kanban is not a card, but it is an actual box. It is an actual bin in there. Okay, some people are saying it's a huge echo. Okay, some people have no echo, other people have an echo. If you could check if your microphone is open, that you close your micro, but most people do not have an echo, so that's good. So the last out of four Kanban systems, which I want to talk a little bit more, that one now is actually different, because most Kanban systems, one requirement is that each part or each box of parts needs a Kanban. You cannot have material without Kanban. But that is different for the triangle Kanban, because with a triangle Kanban, you have only a single Kanban for every part type. At the bottom right, you see the graphical diagram, but it's probably easier explained with the picture at the top right, because the picture is actually my paper supply, which is behind me in my shelf. And I like to buy a box of 2,500 pages of paper. So typical box, I'm sure you have something very similar around. And when I get a new box, I make a small Post-it note and put it at the last pack. And whenever, and then I just use the paper, I use the first pack, the second pack, the third pack, and so on. And when I get to the last pack, I take this Post-it note and put it on my desk, or if my wife uses opens the last pack, she puts the Post-it note on my desk, and then I order another big box of paper. So there's only one Kanban, in this case, a little yellow Post-it for reordering. Not every pack has a Kanban, and I reorder only once when I get to the end of my inventory. And that is also a Kanban system, and it has a bit more inventories than needed, but the benefit is you have less hassle or less frequent ordering. With this paper, I buy 2,500 pages, meaning like 5 packs of 500 pages each. And that for me is no problem. I could use a normal Kanban system, in which case I probably would need only like 2 packs. I would have a 2-bin system, so I would have less tied up capital. I would need less space to store it. But in terms of packs, if I have 2 packs or 5 packs, if it's like 10 euros or 20 euros, it makes no difference. In terms of space, it's also no problem. In fact, ordering a larger batch is a little bit cheaper, because if you order a small package with shipping and everything, it becomes a bit more expensive. I need to order less frequently. Like instead of once every month, I need to order once every half year, roughly. And the big advantage is not the ordering, but nowadays it's the receiving end. And I'm sure you have gotten parcels, and you know that it's sometimes a headache, or kind of you get this message, parcel is at the neighbors. Well, which neighbor? And then you go looking for your parcel and that kind of stuff. And just instead of having this looking for my parcel thing monthly for paper, I have it only once every half year. So it's much less hassle for ordering. at the cost of a little bit more inventory and a little bit more space for paper. So that's one possibility of a Kanban, a triangle Kanban, common for small and inexpensive parts, paper, for example, not much money tied up. Or sometimes if you have a production system where you want to intentionally create larger batches for changeover. If you need large batches for changeovers, then you could also use a triangle Kanban system. And that's, for example, what Toyota does. And I have you a picture from Toyota Museum, but that's an original Toyota machine with an original Toyota triangle Kanban, which if you go to Nagoya, I highly recommend the Toyota Technical Museum in Nagoya. It's really, really good. It has lots of those kind of stuff. And you see those triangle Kanbans. It's triangle Kanban because Toyota, being lean, they made those Kanbans out of scrap metal, and it's easier to get a triangular piece scrap metal than a rectangular piece of scrap metal. That's the only difference why they use triangular. And they made those triangle Kanbans. You see two in the back with attached material bins, and one in the front where it's attached to the machine, which then produces the part. And looking a little bit closer at the triangle Kanban, you see a part number. You see how many pieces, kind of 500 pieces per container. One Kanban represents 4,000 pieces, so that's our lot size to be produced on the machine ER 2500. So all the basic information you need for a Kanban, and just telling you how much and of what part, where to produce. But the triangle Kanban has one additional information, and that is number 2 in this case, and that tells you, okay, once you've produced all the parts, where do you attach the triangle Kanban? And in this example, you attach it to the second box from the bottom. I've illustrated this on the right. You make 4,000 parts, 500 pieces per part, so it's 8 boxes. And once you're done, you put the triangle Kanban to the second part, to the second box from the bottom. Then you consume box 8, box 7, box 6, box 5, box 4, box 3. And if you get to box number 2, then you get to the Kanban and then you reproduce. And box number 2 and box number 1 lasts long enough until you reproduce the parts. So that's the triangle Kanban, also a very interesting approach. For Kanbans, those are the most important Kanban system. Some people divide it a little bit in more detail for a supplier Kanban and a logistic Kanban and other stuff, but I don't really see the huge need for that. And Kanban is an excellent way for make to stock production. It's not so good if you want to produce make to order. If you have custom-made products, Kanban no longer works because every Kanban needs its own part number permanently. And if you make this product only once, a Kanban would not work. It would not limit your inventory. Instead, there's a different approach possible. And with that approach, it's very similar to Kanban. It's also very easy. The biggest problem I have is the name, because there isn't really any generally accepted name. The name I use is CONWIP, Constant Work in Progress. But at Toyota, it's also sometimes called a Type B Kanban. Other people I know call it a tunnel Kanban. And it doesn't really have a good name. And some people even use it without knowing that it's that it's a pull system. But it is a pull system, and it is for make to order. It looks very similar to a Kanban. You have a card with a part, and this one goes through the production, or sometimes the shipping, but usually the production gets produced, and when the part leaves the system, the card goes back. But the card has one major difference to the Kanban. A Kanban permanently has a number attached to it. A CONWIP card has the part type only temporarily attached. So when the card goes back, the card is blank. You remove the information. In this picture, I threw it in the trash. In reality, you put it somewhere on a file or somewhere. And a blank CONWIP goes back to the beginning and meets the backlog of open jobs. Kind of the number of jobs from the customer which are waiting. And if you have a job and a card, then it gets merged. The card gets assigned the next job, which should be the highest priority job. So this is sorted by priority. And the highest priority job gets on the card and then gets released in the system. With this way, with this approach, you never have more jobs in the system than you do have CONWIP cards. So you limit the number of jobs or projects in a make-to-order system. Can also be adapted through workload control. The basic CONWIP card counts number of jobs, but you can also make it a bit more fancier by measuring how much work is which job, and you limit the work in the system. It's also possible. But other than that, very similar to Kanban, except the card, the CONWIP card, gets blanked every single time and assigned to a new part from the backlog. But other than that, it has a loop just like a Kanban system. The great thing about the CONWIP system, it is very similar to Kanban, and because of that, you can easily combine both of them in the same system. Many of you may have the problems that you have a production system where most of your parts are made to stock, but a few products are made to order, and CONWIP is a possible way to combine both of those into the same system and have a pull over the entire production system. Yeah. So question, if customer demand fluctuates, do we have to flatten our production plan to implement pull? If you have fluctuation, no matter from the customer or from the supplier or from your own production system, you need to decouple it. And decoupling, often the best way is by having inventory. If you have larger fluctuations, you need a larger inventory to decouple it. And the next step would be then to try to reduce the fluctuation so you can get away with less inventory. But the primary purpose of inventory is to decouple fluctuations. You can also decouple fluctuations with capacity. You do this with seasonality, kind of when it's peak season, all man on deck, all hands on deck. If it's off season, then they can take holiday and so you adjust the capacity based on the demand, but that usually only for a longer time. And if you fail to do it with inventory and fail to do it with capacity, then automatically your fluctuation will be decoupled by time because the customer has to wait. So that's the three basic ways to decouple fluctuations. But back to CONWIP once more. Here I've made it with cards, but it does not necessarily have to be cards. And many companies have something very similar to a CONWIP system without even realizing that it is a pull system. I have one example here. That's an assembly line of a sports car maker. I think Lotus Elise or something. It's out of my price range. Besides, I'm not a car geek either. But this is automatically a CONWIP system. Because here you see the different cars, and each car is on one of those blue rollers. And you can have never more cars in production than you have blue rollers. So each of those blue rollers would be the same as a CONWIP card. It fits one car, one job, and every job can be different. You see cars in different colors, and they have little information on the windshield, which probably has many more details about what goes in and where. So it's very highly customized work, make to order, but the inventory is limited by the number of rollers. You can never have more cars in the assembly line than you have number of rollers. So a very simple and easy way to make a CONWIP system, and you don't need to deal with any cards or anything. You just need to limit the physical space here by the number of rollers, or in higher quantity car assembly lines by the number of stations or slots where you can have cars. That also is some sort of CONWIP system that limits your inventory. Very easy to do. And as I said, many companies do something very similar without even realizing that this limits the inventory in their assembly line or in their production system. So Kanban and CONWIP, both well suited for production. Kanban for make to stock, CONWIP for make to order. But you can also have pull in purchasing. And for purchasing, usually a good approach, or often a good approach, is reorder point and the very similar related reorder period. If you are in purchasing, you probably have heard about those, you know those. You may not have heard about those in relation to Kanban or pull systems in general, but it is a pull system. Because with a reorder point, you have an inventory and it gets consumed. And at one point, you get to kind of a reorder point, some sort of limit, which gives a signal, says, okay, we have reached our lower limit. We reorder, we fill up to the maximum, to our inventory limit, and then we consume parts again. When we reach the minimum or the reorder point, we fill up again. So the inventory is always fluctuating between the reorder point and the inventory limit. The reorder point, in theory, it could be 0, but in reality, you want to have a little bit of safety buffer for delays with ordering, for things going wrong. But you have your inventory limit and you can have never more parts than your inventory. So you have an inventory limit. And if parts leave the system, not one by one, but at one point, when you get to this point, you get a signal, okay, so many parts have left the system, reorder, refill, put them back in again. So that is also a pull system. It's actually somewhat similar to a triangle Kanban, and it's very commonly used for purchasing. So we have a question. It's helpful to eliminate company policies. No, it's a comment. Thanks for the comment. Yeah. Yeah, but reorder point, it is definitely a pull system, and it's very well suited for purchasing. And if you have your inventory control in your ERP system, and if you trust your ERP system enough, you could also make an automatic order that the ERP system orders automatically whenever it reaches the inventory reorder point. Yeah, it may need a little bit more inventory than a Kanban, but you can adjust this depending on the gap between the reorder point and the inventory limit, how often you want to reorder, and what's your inventory limit and your reorder point. Very similar reorder period, but with a reorder period, you don't reorder when you reach a certain in reorder point, but you reorder periodically, like every Thursday we order that type of screw and we just fill up back to the inventory limit. So it is definitely a pull system, very well suited for purchasing. So there are more pull systems, but so far those are, in my point of view, the most important ones, the most useful ones. Kanbans, CONWIP, and reorder point. With those, you can pretty much do anything you want to do in pull systems and can manage any kind of production system, purchasing system, or even outside of that, a hospital or other example, to do your pull system. There are a few more and less common pull system. For example, there is POLCA, paired cells of overlapping cards, and developed by Rajan Suri, very nice guy, and that's especially designed for job shops, not flow shops, but job shops. And it is somewhat similar to a CONWIP system, with one major difference: the CONWIP loops overlap. Kind of, you have one loop here between process 1 and process 2, and you have a second loop between process 2 and process 3. But process 2 needs a POLCA card from the previous loop and a POLCA card from the subsequent loop to work. So you need 2 POLCA cards at one process to work. sounds more complicated, is more complicated, but with this, it's a trick to avoid blocking. It's a trick to avoid a job shop to block itself and to kind of get overstuffed in one point and keeps the material flow better organized. But it is a little bit more effort, but it is used by some companies, not that many, but the companies which use it seem to like it so far. I haven't used it myself yet, but I've talked extensively with the inventor and it seems to work. The last version of pull systems I would like to present you is drum buffer rope. And that's from Ilya Goldratt, a theory of constraints. And it is also pretty much the same as a CONWIP loop, with one major difference, and this major difference makes it actually worse than CONWIP for me. So drum buffer rope, I do not recommend. It is used. There are quite a few companies which love it and swear on it. My recommendation is if you use it and it works for you, fine, keep on doing it. But if you've never used it, rather go to Kanban or CONWIP. Because drum buffer rope, the main difference to CONWIP is that the loop always ends in front of the bottleneck, which is called the drum. So in a drum buffer rope system, the drum is the bottleneck and the rope is kind of the signal, and the inventory in front of the bottleneck is controlled. He usually makes only one big loop, which is also another drawback, but one big loop in front of the bottleneck with the assumption that since this process is a bottleneck, there isn't really any inventory after the bottleneck anyway. All other processes are just waiting for materials, so it should work. In theory, yes. The problem is the bottleneck is not always static. It's often moving between different processes, and that makes the whole system inferior to CONWIP. Goldratt also developed what he called a simplified drum buffer rope with the assumption that the customer is always a bottleneck. So he just has one big loop over the entire system. But again, the limitation of having the loop end before the bottleneck and the second limitation of having only one big loop, both makes it, in my view, inferior to CONWIP, where you could easily have multiple separate loops, and actually the bottleneck is not that important for pull system design. So there are some more CONWIP ways. There's Copacabana, but that seems to be only in theory, or just recently I've heard about the first plant which actually uses it, which is very complicated, but different ways to do pull. And my preference is Kanban, CONWIP, and Reorder points. That are kind of my preferred ways of doing pull. That's the part I have prepared so far today. And so do you have any questions, anything you would like me to talk more about? I have a huge backup of additional slides if there's anything of interest. One question which came a little bit earlier was about pull systems in administrative tasks as a bureaucracy, a government, that kind of organization. And that would also work. It's kind of general. Government is usually administrative tasks. And with administrative tasks, it's usually similar to a make-to-order situation. No matter if you're doing tax forms or filling out certain documents, it's never the same information. It's always a different information. So every tax form is unique, and you can start with the tax form only once the taxpayer has given you the form, and you can start with it. So you can't really fill out a tax forms on stock in case a taxpayer shows up and wants to pay his taxes. But in this case, you should limit the number of tax forms or the number of projects you do at the same time, similar somewhat to CONWIP. Same also applies to product development. If you give too many projects to your product development team at the same time, they get stuck, because just keeping track of all the projects will will require so much time, there's little left for actual project development. Good. Couple of questions. What are the highest level steps, milestones to implement CONWIP? What do we need to care about? Well, with CONWIP, similar like with Kanban, you need some basic stability. If your machines are falling apart left and right, then maintenance and stability would be the first step. But other than that, if your system works reasonably stable, then you can implement a CONWIP system. You should think about how many cards do you need, how much jobs do you want to have in the system, and actually that's very different between Kanban and CONWIP, or generally between make to stock and make to order. If you produce make to stock, your goal is high material availability at the cost of not too much inventory. So with make to stock, you need to be always on the conservative side to have good material availability. With make to order, the customer has to wait anyway. He can't avoid that. So your goal is a fast lead time, a fast production or turnaround time, while having still a reasonable good utilization of your system. So it's slightly different goals, which makes the calculation between Kanban and CONWIP very, very different. Okay. Hi, Christoph. You do not mention Heijunka. Do you think it's not a must-have for POL? Oh boy, Heijunka. Well, leveling. I'm usually a fan of leveling, but there are many different ways to do level, and POL itself does not strictly require leveling, but it benefits from leveling. Leveling tries to reduce fluctuation, and by reducing fluctuation, you need less buffer inventory. That's the goal of leveling, and it makes POL easier. If you do leveling or if you have less fluctuations, POL is easier because you need less buffer inventory. If you have larger fluctuations, if you don't do leveling well or not at all, your fluctuations will be larger. POL will still work, but you need larger inventories. So that's kind of my take on leveling and POL. Next question. Do you have a deep dive discussion on POL systems in supply chain? Not in the next 3 minutes, unfortunately, but it's discussed in my book when I talk about transport Kanbans. For make to stock, transport Kanbans or reorder point is a good way to do POL. Make to order and purchasing, you don't need really much. You just order it so it arrives on time, so you don't really need any kind of particular POL system for make to order purchasing. Next question, I met in my work the word SWIP, standard work in progress. What do you think about that? I have to think about this first. I know work in progress, but standard work in progress. I'm not too familiar with the term, but from the description, I guess that you try to standardize how much material you have in the system. And again, without knowing the SWIP word by itself, let me write this down. I'll look it up. Not knowing it too exactly, it sounds somewhat like a POL system where you try to limit your inventory, and whenever a part leaves, your work in progress can start the next part, so you can have a constant work in progress, standard work in progress. It seems to be very similar to me, just from what I interpret based on the word SWIP. Next question, will POL help with leveling also? Yes, POL helps with leveling because the signal to reproduce comes usually very quickly. So Kanban helps with leveling because you get a quick signal to reproduce. Triangle Kanban and depending on how you set it up, a reorder point system could actually be the opposite of leveling. So triangle Kanban would be the opposite of leveling. You wait until you need a lot of parts, and so you make all the parts at the same time. So that's the opposite of leveling. In some cases, this may be sensible, as for example, for my printer paper. I don't really want to level my printer paper. I'm fine with having a big box and buying once every half year. Similar to the Heijunka discussion, what about EPEA? Every part, every interval? Very good question. with Kanban, you can also talk a lot about the sequence, or general with POL, you can talk about the sequence. And I'm actually preparing another book on sequencing. Will still take a long time until it's done. But EPEI is a way of leveling by trying to have as small lot sizes as possible, ideally lot size 1, and mix them as well as possible, or at least within 1 day or one certain time frame. Try to make every part you need at least once. It's a way of approaching leveling, EPEI. So we're going to the end of time. Let me just have a quick look at some more questions. What kind of book? What could you recommend for people with less experience to implement POL? What kind of book? In all shame, my own book, that kind of all about POL production. That's trying to explain POL production for very practical for the practitioner. Okay. So I think we're really running out of time. It was a great discussion. Thank you so much for the many questions and for the interest. I liked it, and I hope you liked it too. I also saw we're like almost 70 people at one point. So thank you very much. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate to send me an email or send me some sort of message, and enjoy the rest of this probably largest Lean conference ever. All right. Thank you very much. Bye.